This is a Polestar 4, and I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about it. I'm Jordan, and you're watching Auto Express. No, your eyes do not deceive you. I really am that small compared to this car, because despite the fact that it kind of looks like a coupe or a saloon, it's actually more of a crossover. It's massive. From a design perspective, there is a lot to get to though, because this thing looks really interesting on the road. Now, this Performance Plus car actually has the full body package, which means that it looks a little less SUV-like than some of them, but as you can see, there are plenty of details to really sink your teeth into. These two-part headlights are really quite interesting looking and have that Thor's hammer headlight design. The badge here is not only body colored but also is slightly illuminated, which is really interesting to see at night. Other highlights around the exterior are these 22-inch wheels. Now, standard cars get 20 and then 21-inch as an option, and this high performance pack car gets the big full-size 22s with some of those gold details as well. Now, along the side, you can see here that they are not shy about telling you exactly what sort of powertrain this car has in it. It is in fact an EV, of course, and on the front wing you can see here a Tesla style camera. Another cool thing about this car are the exterior mirrors, which are completely frameless, as you can see, and rotate on their little hinges independently when you move the mirror about. As you can see, there are a couple of other cameras here, which gives it a really good surround view system, and overall the silhouette is very sleek. Not very SUV-like, is it? But of course, one of the things that you're probably most likely to know about the Polestar 4 is that it doesn't have something that most cars do, and that is a rear window. Now, we'll get back to the pros and cons on that a little bit later, but overall it means that at the rear anyway, this car looks super distinctive. It's also, and I'm going to really reiterate this, big, and that's something that's really accentuated by the fact that it's got a full width light bar and very little detailing around the back. Overall though, this definitely is a distinctive new addition to the car market and actually does a really good job of helping Polestar stand out from its rivals. At the moment, you can order your Polestar 4 with one of two powertrain options, either a long-range single-motor version with 268 brake horsepower and a 0 to 62 time of 7.1 seconds. This car, however, is the long-range dual-motor performance pack, which has a much more impressive 536 brake horsepower that'll get 62 in just 3.7 seconds. Now, despite the fact that that little sticker on the side says that it has a 100 kilowatt-hour battery, the usable space is actually more like 94. However, in either case, the range is pretty impressive for a car of this sort of size and weight. Prices for the Polestar 4 start at just under £60,000 for the single-motor long-range car, or about £67,000 for this dual-motor version. If you want the performance pack with all of the extra goodies, that's going to be an extra £4,000 above that, and there's a couple of option packs which can make that price rise even further. The thing is though, both when you look at it from the outside and as you're about to see when we sit inside, that actually sounds like quite good value for money. That's because this cabin is incredibly upmarket. It looks very expensive in here and definitely follows on with Polestar's habit of creating some really slick and contemporary interiors. Overall, the architecture is actually really interesting. There's this bridge across the center console with plenty of storage space underneath. Now, that is nothing new. However, how it's set into this inset section on the dashboard with lots of fabrics and lights makes the whole thing feel very, very premium. As you would well expect, given this car's positioning, the tech pack is absolutely cutting edge. There are two main interfaces here, which is a 15.4-inch touchscreen on the center console and then a further 10.2-inch display that sits in front of the driver. Now, this display here is pretty rudimentary, but its information is clean and very clear. The thing is though, despite the fact that the screen is quite big, there are still too many layers to do most simple functions. For example, if you want to move where the air vents go, you have to click onto the climate control and then you have to fiddle around with these little controls here. Now, this is all very well and good when you're sat still like we are, but if you're driving down the M25 on a rainy winter's day, this is going to be quite difficult to do without having to take your eyes off the road for too long. There are other things to consider as well, in the fact that there are no other physical buttons on the dash, but there is a volume knob. In terms of storage, there is, as you can see here, a couple of cup holders on the center console, plus a relatively compact center console bin. There is somewhere here to charge your phone, which is quite useful, and the door bins, while they are fairly big, aren't particularly useful. There is also a glove box, but that too requires lots of presses of buttons. Did you know that you can sell your car through Auto Express? With decades of reviews and advice behind us, you can sell your car with confidence knowing that we know how much it's really worth. No nonsense, just expertise. For an honest valuation, make sure you click the link in the description below. And if you're wondering exactly how you see out the back of this car considering it doesn't have a rear window, well, that's where this comes in. Now, a digital rear view mirror is nothing new. Cars like Land Rover and Jaguar and even lots of supercars have had these for years. And while it's a little difficult to get used to initially, actually over time it is not such a bad feature and it does give you a really good view out. Space up front is pretty good, but it is worth mentioning that thanks to the battery pack, the floor is actually pretty high in relation to where you sit, which poses the next big issue, which is rear seat space. Now, as you can see, there is plenty of legroom and flat floor, which means that you will be able to fit 3 abreast quite easily. However, taller drivers will once again find that the amount of space between the floor and the seat base is a little shallow, which means that your knees are quite often up near your earlobes. Whilst we're back here, it is worth mentioning though that the other good point of having no rear window means that Polestar's been able to put the header rail quite far back in relation to the rear seats, which means that headroom is very good. Generally though, the rear seat of this car is a really nice place to sit. Not only do you get that fabulous panoramic roof to lighten everything up, but there's also lots of amenities, including some controls for your rear climate control, rear seat vents, and also some extra vents in the B-pillar too. Quality is just as good back here as well, and overall this would be a lovely place to spend quite a long drive. In terms of luggage capacity, the Polestar 4 isn't quite on the same level as traditional boxy SUVs, but it still gets a pretty good 526 litre boot, which is exactly the same as an Audi Q6 e-tron and very nearly as big as a Porsche Macan's. Plus it comes with a height adjustable boot floor, and underneath is a handy 31 litre storage compartment, which is ideal for your charging cables. The rear seats do fold flat and extend the luggage capacity to 1,536 litres, although the sloping rear portion of the body does make it a little awkward to load larger objects. Of course, this being an EV does mean that there is no engine, so if you lift up the bonnet here, you'll find a plastic shrouding and underneath a second tiny boot that's just about big enough for a toaster. The way this car drives though isn't quite so polished. We found that it rides a little bit firmly for our tastes, and while it does deal with potholes and bumps pretty well, there is some sense that the whole thing is just a little bit uncomfortable. Now that has probably something to do with the fact that you always sit a little higher off the road than you expect, but generally speaking, this isn't as comfortable a ride as you'll find in most rivals, and unfortunately, nor is it as fun to drive. Now, it's not really that important that this sort of car be an absolute firecracker on the road. However, if it is counting itself as a rival for things like the Porsche Macan and the Audi Q6, it kind of does matter. We also found that despite the fact that those mirrors are very funky to look at, they do let in a little bit of wind noise, and overall refinement isn't quite as whisper quiet as you'd kind of hope at this sort of price point. In single motor form, it's also not particularly quick, hitting 62 miles an hour in 7.1 seconds. This dual motor car is a lot quicker though at 3.8, but both cars do top out at 124. In terms of range though, this car is pretty on par with those main rivals. The single motor variant will get up to 385 miles out of a charge in ideal conditions, and this dual motor still gets a pretty good 367 miles, which is slightly more than you'll get from something like an SQ6 e-tron. Another thing that Polestar are very good at is ensuring that those sorts of range figures are achievable regardless of the weather. Now, as you can probably tell by my teeth chattering, it is currently winter. We're finding that those range figures are still pretty close to those official figures. In terms of charging, the Polestar 4 will hit about 200 kilowatts on a DC fast charge and do the 10 to 80% top up in about 30 minutes. And that's not quite as good as an equivalent Macan on a 270 kilowatt charge, but it's still pretty good for this type of vehicle. So then, what are our overall thoughts about the Polestar 4? Well, this is a pretty intriguing new offering to the market, and while it's not quite as practical as some of its classic SUV rivals, it definitely has a point of difference. Now, we say that there are still some rough edges to the dynamic package, and while it is beautifully made, there are still some question marks over how it drives on the road in the UK. However, it's still a pretty impressive package, and that's why we give it 4 stars.